off with me, folks, on the Boston Celtics having inconsistency bite them again Sunday night against the Indiana Pacers. This is a Pacers team that Boston beat by 37 points on Friday night, and now inconsistency issues lead to a 9-point loss on Sunday. The Celtics lost 123-114 during this game, and Joe Mazzulla went to the postgame press conference and he singled out the inconsistencies at not one end of the court, but at both ends of the court. The Celtics, it just doesn't seem like right now they can play multiple games in succession with consistent play at both ends of the court. It seems like it's either one end or the other is affecting them on a nightly basis in a negative fashion. Tonight, it was the defensive end. Indiana had an incredible offensive performance, 53% from the field as a team, almost 40% from three-point range, and then they get 22 points from the free throw line. So that defensive inefficiency and inconsistency from the Celtics allowed Indiana to catch a rhythm on offense, and that happened early on, and the Pacers never looked back. And remember, this is a team that was in the Eastern Conference Finals last season against these Celtics. And let me remind you, while it was a sweep, multiple games were close, and multiple games could have easily gone in the other direction. This Pacers team, I don't care what the record is right now, I believe it's 16-17, hovering right around 500 as we're about 35 games into the season. But I don't care what the record is. That team has talent. And by the way, they had more of their talent on the floor tonight on Sunday than they did Friday when the Celtics demolished them by 37 points. So you can't overlook the Pacers. This team is really good. And when they came out of the gates and they were able to start catching a rhythm at a high level offensively during the first quarter, when you give that rhythm and you give that ability to the other team and a Pacers team that has talent up and down the roster, it's always tough to turn that off. And tonight that was the case for the Celtics as they allow 123 points on 53% shooting from the field. A great game by Indiana, not so great for the Boston Celtics. But listen, despite that, the Celtics had a chance to win this game, and somehow they now have 9 losses on the season. Somehow they still have yet to lose a game by 10 points. So there's a little bit of a positive you can still take out of this game, that the Celtics they've yet to have a game where they've been blown out and had no chance of winning. Tonight they lose by 9, and they had multiple chances during the fourth quarter to come back and win this game. One in particular, they were down by, I think it was 11, somewhere around there. They go on a run. They cut it back down to 2. Jason Tatum with a monstrous slam down the lane and one, gets the call and starts yelling at his defender. It looked like he was feeling good in that moment. It looked like the Celtics were feeling good in that moment. But then somehow it doesn't continue. And the interesting thing to me is that Indiana didn't even call for a timeout after that and one play by Jason Tatum. And by the way, I don't think it was a dunk. I think it was just an and one play in the paint, if memory serves. But Rick Carlisle didn't call for a timeout. He just let his Pacers continue to play it out. And that was a great decision, and the Pacers wound up figuring it out. They answered that run after they had been up by 11 or so, and it came down to 2. They then responded with a 13-0 run to put this game away, and it only took about 3 minutes off the clock for them to be able to go on that 13-0 run, turn it back to a 15-point game, and at that point, this game seemed to be over. One other interesting thing that occurred at that time when the Celtics fell behind by 15, there were about 4 minutes left. Joe Mazzulla sent a bunch of his end-of-the-bench guys to the scorer's table to check in. Drew Peterson was going to check in. Jaden Springer, Xavier Tillman, Neemias Queta, all these guys were up at the scorer's table to check in. A timeout is called. The Celtics go to a huddle, and then they come out of that timeout, and a lot of their main guys are still on the floor. Like Tatum's still out there, Pritchard's still out there, Derek White is still out there. I'm not sure exactly. I think Al Horford was out there as well. So I'm not sure what exactly changed in that moment that Joe Mazzulla changed his mind from sending in a bunch of reserves and kind of waving that white flag to saying, no, we're going to keep making this run, and we're going to try to either get back into this game or maybe send a message to those guys who were put back out on the floor. I'm not exactly sure what his mindset was there, but I thought it was interesting to point that out, that he had the white wave flagged, or the white flag waved. There's my dyslexia kicking in. He had the white flag waved, then a timeout is called, and he kind of retracted it and sent his guys back out there. So just something interesting, an observation I thought I would point out. During this game, a few things that stood out to me, some of them more negative than others. The free throw shooting, I mean, it's tough to watch that. The Celtics were only 12 for 19 from the free throw line tonight. This is a team with so much skill in shooting. That shouldn't happen. Tonight they actually had more misses, 7, than Indiana had, which was 5, but Boston took 8 fewer free throw attempts. So you miss more and you take way less. That'll tell you that the percentages were in totally different areas for these two teams. Indy shot 82% from the free throw line. The Celtics just 63%. Another thing that stood out is during the fourth quarter, the Celtics, on another run that they were trying to get back into the game, they cut the deficit down to 6. They've got the ball. And then Peyton Pritchard, very uncharacteristically, commits a couple of careless turnovers on entry passes. Entry passes have been a little bit of an issue for this team this season. Feel like that's an area where the team can concentrate a little bit more on their entry passes and make sure that they're quality entry passes that cannot be picked off by opposing teams. These two in particular were entry passes into the lane, not an entry pass into kind of a post-up area or a high elbow post or anything like that. These were on cuts to the lane to teammates, and Peyton Pritchard's passes just happened to be picked off. So not good moments there. I do feel like that is an area where the Celtics can improve the rest of the season, so something to watch there as well. Defensively, we already talked. It just felt like the Celtics weren't engaged all the way around, particularly in the same fashion that they were Friday night when they won by 37. So there's that inconsistency that we're talking about. Both ends of the ball, both ends of the court, the Celtics played great on Friday. Tonight, decent offense, not so good defense, and I just think that the engagement just simply was not there tonight. Lastly, a positive to point out after this game, Jaylen Brown, another 30-point game. He just scored 44 the other night, and now he scores 31 to tie for the game high in that category. 13 of 21 from the field. He had himself a great offensive performance. He's got 75 points over his last 2 games. So Jaylen Brown certainly finding a rhythm, and he's getting it done in all 3 levels. It's really fun to watch him be able to score at will right now against his opponents. Let's take a few comments from our fans. First up, we're going to have the Saurus on Boston's defensive identity. Next up, we've got Jack Garwood on concerns that he has about how often teams are putting together hot streaks within games against the Celtics. This is an interesting one. I'm looking forward to talking about that. And then lastly, we've got Jacob on the Pacers matchup, which we just touched on. This was an Eastern Conference Finals matchup last season, and then the month of December for the Celtics as a whole. So let's get into the first one here. This one's coming in from the Saurus. All right, the Saurus starts us out saying, need to reestablish their defensive identity, but the loss isn't that much of a concern without 2 starters. We've gotten this far into the episode at this point, and I still have not mentioned the fact that Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis did not play in this game. The Celtics have been missing those guys relatively consistently over the last couple of weeks, and those are 2 very important players when it comes to Boston's defense as a whole. Jrue Holiday is one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, and I've said this before. If you listen to all the episodes, I'm sure you've heard this before, but Jrue Holiday, one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, and then Kristaps Porzingis is basically the shot blocker for the Boston Celtics at the rim. So you're missing key players on both ends of your defense, both on the perimeter and around the basket. And I'm not making excuses here. This does not excuse the Celtics from the effort and the connectiveness that they showed during tonight's game. But it is important to point that out, that they were missing those guys. And those are 2 very, very good defenders, particularly in their specific roles within this defense. And not having those guys out there certainly is going to change things a little bit for you. You would hope that it wouldn't change it quite as much, especially you look at last season. Anytime someone went out, the Celtics, their identity at both ends of the court and the level at which they executed at both ends of the court. It didn't change. That was one of the very important factors for this team last season. Anytime someone was out, someone else stepped in, and the team just kept on chugging along at both ends of the court. So tonight you're missing 2 starters again, 2 critical defenders again, and yet you just aren't able to have that consistency at the defensive end of the floor. Defensive identity, look, what the Celtics did last season is they were going to get under your skin. They were going to apply pressure on the perimeter, and then they were going to defend the rim with their 7-footers around the basket, be it if it was Neemias Queta backing up Kristaps Porzingis, if it was Al Horford giving a little rim protection, Luke Cornett. All of these guys behind Kristaps Porzingis, there was rim protection last year on top of having some ball pressure on the perimeter, and we're just not seeing those 2 things enough and as consistently as we saw last season. So the source, it's hard to disagree with you here. The defensive identity, they have to find it. They've got to relocate it. Then they've got to reestablish it. And let's hope that happens when the new year turns, and hopefully they've got those 2 important defenders back in the lineup when the new year comes, and maybe even beforehand when the Celtics play their final game of 2024 on New Year's Eve. All right, next up, Jack Garwood says, starting to get a bit worried about how many teams we're allowing to accelerate and take the game away from us. Happened the other night with the 76ers on Christmas, and same again tonight. Got to snap these hot streaks much sooner. All right, I told you on the open that this was one of the interesting ones that I wanted to touch on, because this is an observation that I made throughout last season, that the Celtics always had an answer. They always had a way to stop teams from going on massive runs. If you rewind to the year before they won the championship, in the seasons prior to that, teams always found a way to go on long runs, especially in the games that the Celtics lost. The Celtics just didn't have answers for them in those moments. Last year, Boston almost always had an answer. In one way, shape, or form. If it was defensive, if it was offensive, they always figured it out, and teams weren't able to go on massive runs, particularly when the game was hanging in the balance. That's how the Celtics wound up with 64 wins, and they barely ever got blown out. This year, it hasn't seemed like they've quite had that counterpunch quite at the level that they had last season. And that's not to say that it won't resurface as they hopefully get more healthy and more consistent throughout the rest of the season. But right now, that counterpunch doesn't seem to really be there. And tonight, great evidence of that, as Jack points out. The Celtics pull back to within 2 with about 7 minutes left in this game. They've got all of the momentum. They're in their home arena. Jason Tatum with a monster and 1 to get the Celtics back to within 2. After Al Horford made a big 3-pointer, his first 3 of the night, things are feeling good. And then that counterpunch just doesn't continue, and you allow a Pacers team to go on a 13-0 run when the game is hanging in the balance. You just didn't see that happen very often last season. And as Jack points out here, it's happened a couple times just this week for Boston. And talking about Christmas Day, the loss to the 76ers, as Tyrese Maxey and the 76ers kind of pulled away for that win. And then tonight you see it in the fourth quarter again, this time against Indiana with the Pacers. Their advantage went down to 2. Then they respond with a dominant 13-0 run. So that counterpunch, we've got to keep a lookout for that this season as the Celtics go into the new year. Counterpunches are so critical to being able to have long-term success in the regular season, and in particular during the postseason. When you can stop teams from going on runs, like major runs within games, you're always going to have a chance. And by the way, I just got to point this out again, the Celtics did still have a chance to win this game tonight, okay? Multiple times during the fourth quarter. It just kind of got away mid to late in the fourth quarter, and they weren't able to make that final counter punch to snap that streak that the Pacers were putting together when they scored 13 straight. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on that the rest of the season. Hopefully you will too, and hopefully we see better results from the Celtics when it comes to answering the call and being able to stop the opponent from going on major runs when the game is hanging in the balance. All right, last comment of the night coming in. This is from Jacob. And Jacob says, Pacers are solid in a bad matchup for C's. But 7-6 is the worst month I can remember in a while for these Boston Celtics. All right, let's dive into the first one. We talked about this a little bit with earlier on, but Jacob says Pacers are solid in a bad matchup for the C's. Like, don't overlook these Pacers. There's a reason why they were in the Eastern Conference Finals last season. That was not a fluke. This is a good team. They can beat anyone in the league, and they could probably beat anyone in a 7-game series in the league if they're playing their A game during all 7 of those games, or at least for the majority. We saw their A game tonight. This team is a very talented offensive team. You saw Tyrese Halliburton have a great game. He scored 31 points to match Jaylen Brown's 31 as the leading scorer. And then 6 players on the Pacers scored at least 12 points during this game. So there was balance around the roster. And throughout this game, they were scoring in the paint, 66 points in the paint. They got outshot. Okay, Boston made 7 more three-pointers than the Pacers, and the Pacers still won by 9 points. So that goes to show you that they were finding other ways to score. They were beating the Celtics off the dribble, getting into the paint. Either the player that beat his defender off the dribble was scoring at the rim, or he was dropping it off for a big man to score at the rim. This team has a lot of talent, both inside and out. Siakam is a great player. Miles Turner always can turn it up and have a great game. Mathurin, solid. Andrew Nembhard, he's a thorn in Boston's side. He's solid as well. And then you've always got guys coming off the bench like T.J. McConnell and Ben Shepherd. These are guys that you never know what they're going to do on a nightly basis, but they tend to play really well against the Boston Celtics. So can't overlook the Pacers. This is a good team. Okay, I don't think anyone should overlook them. They played really well tonight. The final comment, just talking about this 7-6 December as a whole. Jacob says this is the worst month I can remember in a while. Well, Boston only lost 18 games all season last year. Okay, they've lost 6 already just in December. I talked about this during the last episode, either on Christmas Day or on the episode on Friday night when the Celtics took on the Pacers, that this month, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I think a lot of these struggles have actually had to do with inconsistency with Boston's lineups. Okay, and that's for multiple reasons. They've had players going in and out of the lineup for injury purposes. Drew Holiday has missed the most time this month that he's missed literally since he got to the Boston Celtics with his shoulder impingement. Missed another game tonight. Kristaps Porzingis has kind of been in and out of the lineup throughout this month, so he's been inconsistent. And then on top of that, the Celtics have had an inconsistent schedule as a whole because of the NBA Cup. And by the way, I think in the long run, I've said this before, I think in the long run that's going to come back to help them. But right now, it's hurt, and it's going to help them because of rest, by the way. Okay, Jason Tatum got a full week off. Al Horford got a full week off. Now, Drew Holiday is out with an injury, but it's not like it's his legs or anything. He's going to come back and be fine. He's getting time off. So I think that this is all going to help them in the long run. But when you're missing players with injuries throughout the entire month, players are in, players are out, you don't know who you're going to have every night. And then on top of that, with the NBA Cup, you've basically got, like, I think it was 2 games in 7 days or 3 games in 12 days, something like that. Inconsistency on the schedule where you're just not playing. I think a rhythm can easily kind of go by the wayside. So you combine those two together, and I think that is what has led to Boston's struggles this month. Just a 7-6 record. That is certainly not what we all expect out of them. That is certainly not what they expect out of themselves. And let's just hope that as they turn the calendar into 2025, they're able to turn their consistency up. They're able to get full health and make sure that they've got the same lineup taking the court far more often than not. They just haven't been able to have that so far this season. So great comment from you here, Jacob. I agree with you on both of these. And let's just see if the Celtics can get back into the win column when they come back on the court on New Year's Eve when they host in a matinee, by the way. This is a matinee game. They're not playing at night when they host the Toronto Raptors. So that will be the final game of 2024. And then we turn the calendar into a very challenging month of January. All right, that's a wrap for Sound Off with the Boston Celtics tonight. I appreciate you giving us a listen or a watch. Make sure you click to subscribe, and then make sure that you answer my post on X after the game on New Year's Eve with your comments and your takeaways from what the Celtics gave on the court. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you Tuesday night.